Hi guys, it's Christine Van Gyn with the Canadian Constitution Foundation, and this is the Freedom Update. Today I want to tell you about a new case that we're taking on. We're going to be suing the city of Brampton, Ontario, because of a new election gag law that has been voted on by Mayor Patrick Brown and the Brampton City Council. The new bylaw would prohibit outdoor election signs, including on private residential property. I can't wait to tell you all about it. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Christine, and I'm the litigation director with the Canadian Constitution Foundation, a legal charity that fights for fundamental freedoms in Canada. I upload regular videos about our ongoing cases and about other interesting developments in constitutional law in Canada. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please hit like and subscribe below. It really helps my videos out a lot. Also, please remember that nothing in my videos is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, please consult your own lawyer. So let me tell you about this new Brampton bylaw. On November 28th, 2022, Brampton City Council voted for an amended bylaw that would restrict the display of election signs outside. This includes federal, provincial, and municipal election signs. This restriction also applies to all private property, including residential property. That means if there's a federal election, if you live in Brampton, you cannot put an election sign on your lawn. Now, the amended bylaw is not yet in force. It has not yet been enacted, although it has been voted on. Enactment is going to happen at an upcoming council meeting. And once it is enacted, that is when we are able to file our constitutional challenge. Right now, we have everything lined up, including we've retained counsel, and we're working with some residents of Brampton. We have a joint retainer with them, and they are going to be challenging this bylaw alongside us, with us supporting the litigation. Now, in advance of that November 28th bylaw vote, I wrote to Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown and to all members of Brampton Council, warning them that the proposed amendments that would restrict the display of election signs, including on private property, that was unconstitutional. And that if they proceeded to enact this bylaw, we at the Canadian Constitution Foundation would bring a legal challenge to defend the rights of Brampton residents and voters if this amended bylaw was passed. Now, I have to say, I don't actually want to sue Brampton at all. I have so much other work to do. But this bylaw is so blatantly unconstitutional that Patrick Brown, who is a lawyer, and Brampton Council, who have a city solicitor, well, they should really know better. It's a waste of time and taxpayer money for Brampton Council to pass a bylaw that they ought to know is unconstitutional, which they've been warned by me is unconstitutional. We could avoid all of the trouble of litigation if they would just, act like a normal city council, not try to gag the speech of voters and of their political opponents during the time it matters most, which is during an election. Well, they still voted for the bylaw. It is just so dumb. They even brought up the fact that there was adverse case law during the council meeting. Here, I'll play the clip for you.
Anybody? Okay, we have Councillor Fortini on the speakers list. Councillor Fortini, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Is our legal department or legal online? There's a couple of questions.
Legal department. Is there any?
Or legal?
Yeah,
is there any legal?
Yep.
Okay, just a question. So I received a bunch of things that today that on the signs, and I know I supported it, but Vaughan tried to do the same thing, and Supreme Court overturned the rule because it's a freedom of speech. Do we know that? Are we going against a ruling that we have no authority to do? Do we know?
Do we want to do this in open session or?
Oh yeah, well, it's open public. I received.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. It's Colleen Grant, Councillor Fortini.
Yeah.
I believe Council's already been provided with some legal advice in closed session with regard to this issue. The reports, I believe, were attached at the last Committee of Council meeting.
Okay, and the other thing is, do we do we have to declare conflict on that? Because, we have our own signs with all the fines. Is it a conflict for us? Everything's will be okay? Because I did support it, but I don't want to end up in any issues, going against our own fines at the end.
Councillor Fortini, that's not the item, it's separated.
Well, it's so about the signs. Anyway, I like to maybe, I supported it. I just seen this thing coming about the Supreme Court. It's against the freedom of speech. So if a resident puts their sign up, what can we really do at the end? That's all I worry about. So, I think we should have had a little bit more time on this. It was not in a hurry because all these things I'm getting now, what happened in Vaughan, and they overturned it. So we might get someone filing this. So just to be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fortini.
Oh my gosh, I really cannot believe that they still voted to enact this bylaw. So, as I said, I don't really want to have to do this, but we're going to. So what now? Well, we've retained a lawyer to represent us in the case. Her name is Anna Maria Enenjor, and she is amazing. She specializes in criminal defense and constitutional law, as well as civil rights law. She represented us, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, at the Supreme Court in a freedom of expression case in 2021. In that case, the court actually adopted a number of our arguments, and that case was a really great result for freedom of expression. So she is exceptionally talented. She's going to be a great lawyer. We're also working with several residents of Brampton who would be directly impacted by this amended bylaw, including some former municipal candidates and voters. And Anna Maria is jointly representing us, the CCF, with those individuals. It's a really great group. As I said, it's individual voters who want to put signs on their lawns during elections and candidates who want to advertise with lawn signs. Now, let me get into the details of the law and the policy to explain why this election sign ban is so terrible. Maybe you will be more interested in it than the Brampton City Council was in learning about the law. So at the very highest level, the bylaw is a problem because it entrenches incumbent advantage by protecting candidates with name recognition and prohibiting their opponents from meaningfully advertising. Council voting on this bylaw, I've said, is transparently self-serving. It's very disturbing to me and also revealing that at an earlier council meeting, November 23rd, Brampton Committee of Council focused in their conversations and debates around this proposed change far more on the impact this bylaw would have on the cost savings to their own campaigns rather than the impact that a restriction on the right to freedom of expression on residents and voters of Brampton would have. Of course, at a legal level, we have a charter-protected right to express ourselves, and Brampton politicians have trampled on the right of residents to express their political opinions during the most crucial time, that is during an election. Now, let me explain a little bit more around the law of freedom of expression. So the sign bylaw is what we call a prima facie violation of freedom of expression. On its face, it is a violation. Because of the importance of the right to free expression, any attempt to restrict that right must be subject to the most careful scrutiny. That's from a case called R.V. Sharp from the Supreme Court in 2001. And limits on political speech will generally be the most difficult to justify. That has been confirmed in cases like Thomson Newspapers and Harper in Canada, two very important freedom of expression Supreme Court cases. So banning election signs, let alone on private property, is a violation of free expression on its face. Once a breach of the charter has been identified, the onus then shifts to Brampton to justify the breach by employing the analysis under Section 1 of the charter. That's the reasonable limits clause of our charter. In order to do that analysis, we need to look at the rationale for the sign bylaw. And that rationale is laid out in the staff report of the town of Brampton, which is from May 17th, 2021. Now, according to that report, some of the rationale includes reducing visual clutter and driver distraction in Brampton, creating a fair and equal opportunity for residents to and advertisers to display messaging. Another concern was a large number of contraventions of existing sign bylaws, which prohibited signs on public property and prohibited signs being left up after the election period. And there was also a reference to the impact of plastic waste from these plastic lawn signs. Now, one thing I'll point out is if the city of Brampton is concerned about the number of infractions, these infractions were actually committed by the city council members who voted on this bylaw to ban all signs. So they're saying we need to ban signs because we weren't following the existing bylaw. It is crazy. So to pass the Section 1 analysis, Brampton needs to show that the sign bylaw is a reasonable and demonstrably justified limit to free expression, and that is done through what we call a proportionality test, which is set out in another Supreme Court case called Oakes. The proportionality test requires that the means that are chosen to achieve this goal are rationally connected to an objective, they're minimally impairing, and that they produce benefits that outweigh the detriment to freedom of expression. And in my view, the sign bylaw fails on all three of these fronts, and it also conflicts with a long line of cases dealing with municipal sign laws. The sign bylaw lacks a rational connection to this goal of fair and equal messaging as articulated in the staff report and the November 23 Brampton meeting. The rationale is actually of fair and equal messaging is actually undermined by the sign bylaw. The inability of new candidates to promote their name or image doesn't make elections more financially equitable and accessible. It doesn't make messaging more fair and equal. It actually entrenches incumbent advantage. There's a Supreme Court case called Ramsden and Peterborough where the Supreme Court stressed the importance of signs as an effective and inexpensive means of communication for individuals and groups that don't have sufficient economic resources. With respect to the goal of visual clutter, there's also a lack of a rational connection. The bylaw applies throughout Brampton, not merely in the downtown area where, heritage sight lines might matter. It applies to an individual living on the outskirts of town, even though the sign in that area might not constitute clutter. And it applies not just at major intersections where I'd say, questionable rationale of driver distraction might apply. It also applies on residential streets where driver distraction would be less of a problem than perhaps at major intersections. Now, to the extent that the sign bylaw is being justified as a waste reduction measure and for environmental reasons, which I would say council actually focused very, very, very little on. The big focus of council was on the cost savings to their own campaigns. Now, this plastic waste rationale is also kind of a red herring because the bylaw actually applies to election signs that are not made out of plastic, including posters or homemade signs made on cardboard or wood. Moreover, other types of signs, like commercial signs displayed on private property, those student painter signs, they may be made of plastic, but they're not actually subject to this bylaw. So the sign bylaw is not content neutral. It's concerned with restricting a particular type of speech and not the means of how that speech is displayed. Now, on the measure of minimal impairment, I also say that the sign bylaw is not minimally impairing. The staff report on signs outlined alternative options for council, and council voted to enact the most restrictive prohibition on signs. So there you have it on minimal impairment. They had all these other options that could have been used to achieve this goal. They chose the one that most limited freedom of expression. The sign bylaw is what we call a complete prohibition on election signs, and a total prohibition on commercial signs has never been justified by courts under Section 1, let alone a total prohibition on the more closely protected political speech of election signs. Complete prohibitions are a lot harder to justify. On the third part of the Oakes test, which is proportionality, I argue that the damage to freedom of expression caused by the Brampton sign bylaw far exceeds any hypothetical benefit that bylaw could produce. Even if there were a rational connection between the goals articulated by council and the sign bylaw is not proportionate. Total prohibitions have been considered in a number of cases like Ramsden and Peterborough, Edmonton and Forget, Van Niagara and Oakville, and Guignard. Those cases deal with total prohibitions and held that the total prohibitions were not proportionate. It's important to remember that a little bit of temporary visual clutter or even potential plastic waste, that cannot outweigh the constitutionally guaranteed right of residents to express their political preferences in the midst of an election, the time when the right to express such preferences matter the most. One of the reasons that we are pursuing this case is because we're worried about the precedent it might set if it goes unchallenged. This election sign ban could serve as, dark inspiration to other municipal politicians looking to silence their opponents, whether those opponents are candidates or voters. That's why we are moving really quickly to nip this unconstitutional bylaw in the bud before it becomes a bigger trend. We're concerned about freedom of expression in every corner of the province and indeed every corner of the country. It needs to be strongly defended, and we're really happy to do that job, even if I wish that Patrick Brown and Brampton City Council would back down on their own. Now, we do have costs associated with creating this great freedom of expression precedent. The case is going to cost us up to around $60,000. So we depend on voluntary donations to get this work done guarding freedom of expression. So if you're interested in supporting this fight, you can make a donation at the ccf.ca/donate. We are a charity, so you will receive a tax receipt if you make a donation. And actually, until the end of the year, we have a group of generous supporters who are doubling donations up to a maximum of $100,000. So if you donate before the end of the year, your impact will actually be doubled. If you want to stay up to date about this case and all our other cases, you can also sign up for our email freedom updates at the ccf.ca/donate. Okay, that's all for this update. Thanks for watching, and let's keep fighting for freedom in Canada.